The world had ended in Joplin, Missouri, leaving behind a silence louder than the storm itself. In the suffocating darkness of a collapsed barn basement, the air was thick with the acrid smell of gas leaks and wet, rot-filled earth. It was a post-apocalyptic nightmare where hope seemed to have been swept away by the tornado's violent hand. Inside this tomb of splintered wood and twisted metal, the freezing water was rising with terrifying speed, black and merciless. It wasn't just rain, a burst. Pipe was rapidly turning the debris-filled cellar into a watery grave. Every creak of the unstable structure above sounded like a gunshot, threatening to bury everything alive in tons of concrete and mud. In the center of this hellscape stood Honey, a golden retriever who was once the picture of sunshine, but was now unrecognizable. Her beautiful golden coat was matted with gray sludge, heavy with the weight of the disaster. Her paws were raw, bleeding crimson into the muddy water from hours of frantically digging at the blockade that sealed her fate. She was shivering uncontrollably, not just from the biting cold that seeped into her bones, but from a terror that no living creature should ever endure. Yet, despite her exhaustion, she refused to collapse. Her maternal instinct was a fire burning in the dark, the only thing keeping the shadow of death at bay. Huddled in a precarious corner, balanced on a piece of floating driftwood, were 4 tiny, whimpering puppies, barely 20 days old. They were blind to the horror around them, crying out for warmth, their high-pitched squeaks echoing off the damp walls like a siren song of tragedy. The water was inches from their trembling bodies. Honey paced back and forth in the knee-deep muck, nudging the wood with her nose to keep it steady against the current. She looked up at the slivers of grey sky peeking through the shattered floorboards above, her amber eyes wide and pleading. She wasn't just barking, she was praying to the heavens, begging God not to take her babies before they had even tasted life. Outside, the devastation was total. Mr. Samuel, a 65-year-old farmer with hands calloused by decades of honest work, picked his way through the ruins of his life. He had lost his home, his barn, and nearly his hope, wandering the wreckage like a ghost in his own history. The rain lashed against his weathered face, hiding the tears he was too proud to shed. He felt an emptiness in his chest that echoed the landscape, questioning why he had been spared when everything he loved was gone. But Samuel was a man who believed that we are left on this earth to be God's hands, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being guided toward the remains of the old cellar. Suddenly, a sound pierced the rhythmic drumming of the rain, a howl so filled with agony and desperation that it froze Samuel in his tracks. It wasn't the wind, it was the cry of a soul, bargaining with fate. Samuel scrambled over a pile of wet bricks, his heart hammering against his ribs. He reached a gap in the debris, shining his flickering flashlight into the abyss below. There, emerging from the shadows like a muddy specter, was Honey. She didn't cower. She didn't run. She looked straight up into the beam of light, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that transcended species. In that gaze, Samuel saw a mother's fierce, undying love. Honey did something that defied all animal instinct for self-preservation. Instead of trying to scramble out the small opening towards safety, she let out a sharp bark and grabbed the hem of Samuel's heavy work coat through the gap, tugging him downward. It was a clear, undeniable command. "Look, don't save me, save them." Samuel dropped to his knees in the mud, peering deeper into the gloom. The flashlight beam swept across the darkness and landed on the floating driftwood. He gasped, his hand flying to his mouth. "Lord, have mercy," he whispered, his voice cracking. The water was rising fast, lapping at the tiny paws of the puppies. Seeing that the human understood, Honey released his coat and splashed back into the freezing water. She swam to her babies, placing her body between them and the rising tide, using her warmth to shield them from the hypothermia that was seconds away. She looked back at Samuel, her tail giving a single slow wag. a final act of faith. She was ready to drown right there if it meant comforting her children in their last moments. The sight of her sacrifice, choosing love over life, broke Samuel's heart into a million pieces. He knew then that this wasn't just a rescue, it was a divine mission. Stop scrolling. Look at the devotion in this mother's eyes. She is ready to give her life for her babies. If you believe God sends angels in all forms, please subscribe to our channel and pray for this rescue. Your like helps us find more lost souls like Honey. Can Samuel save them in time? The situation was far worse than it looked from the surface. A massive oak support beam had snapped during the tornado and was now wedged diagonally across the main access point, blocking any human from entering the basement. The wood groaned under the pressure of the shifting house above. Samuel pushed against it with all his might, but it wouldn't budge an inch. He was an old man, tired and battered by the storm, and this obstacle felt like a mountain. The water below was now swirling with more intensity, a dark vortex threatening to capsize. The makeshift raft the puppies clung to. Time was the ultimate enemy now, a silent killer ticking away with every drop of rain. The abstract villain of the storm wasn't finished with them yet. Thunder rumbled ominously in the distance, vibrating through the fragile ground. The basement walls were slick with slime and mud, making any attempt to climb down a potential suicide mission. If Samuel slipped, he would fall on top of the family he was trying to save, crushing them instantly. Or worse, the vibrations from his movement could bring the rest of the rotting ceiling down, sealing them all in a watery tomb forever. Samuel stood up, wiping the rain and sweat from his eyes, staring down at the golden mother who watched him with trusting expectation. He couldn't leave to get help. By the time he returned, the water would have claimed them. He was their only chance, their only barrier against death. A surge of adrenaline, fueled by righteous indignation at the cruelty of nature, coursed through his veins. "I ain't leaving you, Mama," he choked out, his voice fierce against the storm. "Not today, not on my watch." But as the water crept over Honey's paws, the terrifying reality set in. Promise or not, he had no idea how to get past that beam before the water swallowed them whole. Samuel didn't waste a second on doubt. He ran back to his battered pickup truck, his boots slipping on the slick, debris-covered ground. His heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs as he rummaged through the tool bed, his shaking hands searching for the one thing that could fight gravity, a heavy-duty hydraulic jack and a thick steel chain. The rain was coming down harder now, washing the tears from his face, but not the fear. He grabbed the cold metal equipment, feeling its weight like a burden of responsibility. He knew he wasn't as strong as he used to be, but looking back at that dark hole where an entire family was drowning, he felt a surge of strength that could only be described as divine intervention. Returning to the gaping maw of the basement, the situation had deteriorated rapidly. The water had risen another 2 inches, now lapping dangerously at the makeshift raft, where the puppies huddled together in a shivering mass. Honey was frantic, paddling in circles around them, her nose nudging the wood to keep it afloat, her soft whimpers lost in the roar of the storm. Samuel knew he had to descend into that pit, but the mud slope was a death trap of slime and sharp debris. He secured the chain to a sturdy fence post outside and began to rappel down, the rusty links biting into his palms. Every inch he lowered himself was a gamble against the unstable earth, threatening to bury them all. When Samuel's boots finally splashed into the freezing muck of the basement floor, Honey's reaction was immediate and terrified. Traumatized by the tornado's violence, the loud clanking of the chain and the sudden intrusion of a large figure sent her into a defensive panic. She bared her teeth, letting out a low, guttural growl, placing herself squarely between the stranger and her babies. She didn't know he was a savior. To her, he was another monster in the dark come to hurt them. Samuel froze, raising his hands slowly, palms open. "Easy, Mama. I'm here to help," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I promise, I won't let the water take them." The tension in the air was thicker than the humidity. Samuel moved with agonizing slowness, ignoring the rising water that was now soaking his jeans. He needed to position the hydraulic jack under the fallen oak beam that blocked his path to the puppies. But the floor was a soup of mud and debris. If the jack slipped while lifting the tons of wood above, the entire ceiling would come crashing down, crushing both him and the dogs instantly. Honey watched his every move, her muscles coiled tight, ready to attack if he made a wrong move. Her eyes were wide with fear, reflecting the beam of his. Flashlight like two desperate stars in a black sky. Samuel positioned the jack on a flat piece of concrete he found submerged in the muck. He began to pump the handle, the metallic clink, 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 echoing eerily in the confined space. With every pump, the wood groaned in protest, a sound that made the hair on Samuel's arms stand up. The beam began to lift, millimeter by agonizing millimeter. Suddenly, a piece of the ceiling crumbled and fell into the water with a loud splash, just inches from... "Honey!" She yelped and scrambled back, accidentally knocking the raft. One puppy slid toward the edge, almost falling into the dark water. "No!" Samuel shouted, lunging forward instinctively, forgetting his own safety. For a heart-stopping second, time seemed to freeze. The puppy teetered on the edge of the driftwood, blind and helpless. Honey, driven by pure instinct, snapped her jaws gently around the pup's scruff and pulled him back to safety, her body trembling violently. She looked at Samuel, who had frozen mid-lunge. In that moment of shared terror, something shifted. She saw the panic in the man's eyes, not for himself, but for her child. The growl died in her throat, replaced by a soft, pleading whine. She lowered her head, surrendering to his presence. She understood now. He was their only hope. Samuel exhaled a breath he didn't know he was holding and returned to the jack. He pumped it 3 more times until the opening was just wide enough for him to squeeze through. The structure above creaked ominously, a ticking time bomb of timber and nails. He waded through the waist-deep water, the cold stealing the breath from his lungs. Reaching the raft, he didn't grab the puppies immediately. He reached out a trembling hand to Honey first. She hesitated, sniffing his fingers, smelling the rain and the honest sweat of a working man. Then she licked his hand, a wet, rough seal of trust that felt like a blessing. "Okay, girl, let's get your babies," Samuel murmured, tears mixing with the sweat on his face. He gently scooped up the first puppy, a tiny ball of wet fur that fit in the palm of his hand. The pup let out a high-pitched squeak, and Honey watched intently but didn't interfere. Samuel tucked the puppy inside his heavy jacket, against the warmth of his chest. He repeated this, one by one, moving with practiced efficiency despite his frozen fingers. Each life he secured against his heart felt like a victory against the darkness. The water was now up to Samuel's chest. They were running out of time. The rescue wasn't over. Honey was exhausted, her legs shaking from hours of treading water and fighting the cold. She tried to climb onto the debris to follow Samuel, but her strength gave out, and she slipped back into the murky depths, her head going under for a terrifying second. Samuel spun around, grabbing her by her collar and the loose skin of her neck. "I got you! I got you!" he grunted, heaving with all his might. She was heavy, her golden coat waterlogged and weighed down by mud. For a moment, it seemed like the suction of the mud would claim her, pulling her down into the abyss. With a primal yell of effort, Samuel hauled Honey up and over the debris pile, pushing her toward the opening he had created. She scrambled through, claws scrabbling on the wet wood, coughing up water but alive. Samuel followed close behind, his lungs burning. Just as his boots cleared the threshold of the basement, a loud crack thundered through the air. The hydraulic jack slipped. The massive oak beam slammed down, collapsing the rest of the ceiling into the water where they had been standing seconds ago. A cloud of dust and water sprayed out, coating them. They had escaped death by a literal fraction of a second. Safe on the muddy grass outside, the rain felt different now, cleansing rather than threatening. Samuel collapsed on his knees, his chest heaving. Honey didn't run. She immediately crawled into his lap, frantically sniffing at his jacket where her babies were tucked away. Samuel unzipped his coat, revealing 4 wet, shivering but alive puppies. The reunion was chaotic and beautiful. Honey licked them vigorously, checking each one, her tail thumping a weak rhythm against Samuel's leg. But as the adrenaline faded, Samuel looked closer at the smallest puppy. It wasn't moving. It wasn't making a sound. Are you rooting for this angel? Your like helps save more lives. Subscribe to support our mission. Now, let's see if they survive. The joy of the rescue evaporated in an instant. Samuel picked up the runt of the litter, a tiny female who felt alarmingly cold and limp in his large hand. Her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, bubbles of fluid forming at her nose. Honey sensed it too. She nudged Samuel's hand with her nose, letting out a low, mourning sound that tore through the stormy night. The cold water had done its damage. The physical danger of the collapse was over, but the battle for life was just beginning. Samuel scooped them all up into the cab of his truck, cranking the heater to the max. He looked at Honey in the rearview mirror, her eyes filled with a terrifying question he didn't know how to answer. Samuel sped down the debris-strewn road, the truck's tires spinning in the mud. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew death when he saw it. The smallest puppy was fading fast, her tiny heart fluttering like a dying moth. Honey laid her head on Samuel's arm as he drove, her warmth seeping into him, trusting him to perform one more miracle. But as they raced toward the only veterinary clinic that might still be standing, Samuel feared that saving them from the basement was the easy part. The real nightmare was about to begin in the harsh light of the examination room. Samuel's truck roared into the parking lot of the emergency veterinary clinic, tires screeching against the wet asphalt like a desperate plea. He didn't wait to park properly. He abandoned the vehicle near the entrance, the engine still sputtering, and scooped the bundle of wet fur into his arms. Bursting through the glass doors, he looked like a wild man, covered in mud and blood, shouting for help. The receptionist gasped, but the urgency in Samuel's eyes cut through the chaos. A team of vet techs, sensing the critical nature of the situation, rushed forward with warm towels and a gurney. Honey, despite her exhaustion, scrambled out of the truck and followed close at Samuel's heels, limping but refusing to be separated from her dying brood. Dr. Reynolds, a veteran veterinarian with eyes that had seen too much sorrow, immediately took charge. The sterile scent of the clinic clashed violently with the smell of swamp water and decay clinging to the animals. "Get them into the trauma room now," she commanded, her voice sharp and professional. Samuel laid the puppies onto the stainless steel table, his hands trembling as he stepped back. The smallest puppy, the little female who had stopped moving in the truck, was now turning a terrifying shade of blue. Her body was limp, a tiny rag doll surrendered to the cold. Honey let out a high-pitched keen, standing on her hind legs to see the table, her paws scratching frantically against the metal. The medical team moved with a synchronized efficiency that was almost blurry to watch. Dr. Reynolds placed a stethoscope on the runt's tiny chest, her expression tightening into a grim mask. "No heartbeat. She's gone into cardiac arrest from severe hypothermia," she announced, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. Samuel felt his knees buckle. He grabbed the edge of the counter, whispering a prayer that felt more like a beg. "Don't you dare give up on her," he choked out, looking at the tiny, lifeless form. Honey seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. She stopped scratching and went deadly silent, her amber eyes fixed on the doctor's hands, waiting for a verdict from the universe. The doctor didn't give up. She began performing CPR with just her thumb and forefinger, compressing the puppy's chest with a rhythm that mimicked a ticking clock. "Come on, little one. Fight," she murmured. A technician placed a tiny oxygen mask over the puppy's muzzle, while another injected a stimulant directly into her vein. The room was silent except for the whoosh of the oxygen and the wet thud of the compressions. Seconds stretched into agonies. 10 seconds, 20, 30. The puppy remained motionless, a small tragedy on a cold table. Samuel felt a tear track through the mud on his cheek. Had they survived the flood only to die in the safety of the light? Then a miracle happened, a small, almost imperceptible gasp. The puppy's chest hitched, then spasmed. A weak cough expelled a tiny amount of water, followed by a faint, raspy squeak that sounded like the sweetest symphony Samuel had ever heard. "We have a pulse!" the tech shouted, her voice breaking the tension. Honey's tail gave a single, emphatic thump against the floor. Color began to return to the puppy's gums, shifting from blue to a pale pink. The team quickly moved her into an incubator, surrounding her with heat pads. Samuel let out a breath that felt like it had been held for a lifetime, his hand resting on Honey's head. She leaned into him, her body sagging with relief, but the danger wasn't over. While the puppies were being stabilized, Dr. Reynolds turned her attention to Honey. Now that the adrenaline was fading, the toll of the rescue was horrifyingly visible. Her paws were shredded, raw flesh exposed, where her claws had been worn down to the quick from digging at the concrete and wood. She tore her own feet apart trying to get to them, the doctor noted softly, gently lifting one of Honey's paws. The wounds were deep and packed with debris, a massive infection risk. Honey flinched as the antiseptic touched her raw skin but didn't pull away. She looked at Samuel, her eyes heavy with trust, as if saying, "Fix me so I can take care of them." The cleaning process was grueling. It took 3 technicians to hold Honey steady, not because she was aggressive, but because the pain was immense. Samuel stayed right in her line of sight, stroking her ears and murmuring soft reassurances. "You're a good mama, the best mama," he repeated, his voice a steady anchor in her sea of pain. They bandaged all 4 of her paws in thick, soft gauze, making her look like she was wearing white boots. Dr. Reynolds administered a strong antibiotic and a painkiller, and for the first time in days, the tension left Honey's body. Her eyelids drooped, the exhaustion finally claiming her. As the night wore on, the clinic quieted down. The storm outside had passed, leaving a stillness that felt heavy and sacred. The puppies were sleeping soundly in the incubator, a pile of warm, breathing fur. The runt, now named Hope by the staff, was nestled in the middle, safe and pink. Honey was settled in a large kennel right next to them, her bandaged paws resting on a soft blanket. Samuel refused to go home. He sat in a plastic chair next to her cage, his hand reaching through the bars to hold her paw. He watched the rise and fall of her chest, marveling at the resilience of life. Around 3 a.m., a moment of crisis returned. Hope's monitor beeped an alarm. Her temperature had dipped again. The vet tech rushed in, but before she could open the incubator, Honey was already alert. She pressed her face against the glass of her kennel, whining. Urgently, her maternal radar far more sensitive than any machine. The tech adjusted the heat and rubbed the puppy vigorously. Samuel stood up, his heart in his throat. "Is she?" he started. The tech smiled tiredly. "She's fighting. She just needs to know her mom is here." They moved Honey's cage closer, so her nose was inches from the incubator vents. Hope settled immediately. The bond between them was a lifeline stronger than medicine. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold, the worst was officially over. Dr. Reynolds did a final check during her morning rounds. "They're going to make it, Samuel. All of them," she said, signing the chart with a flourish. "Whatever guardian angel was watching over that basement followed you here." Samuel looked at Honey, who was now awake and wagging her tail, her eyes bright and clear. He realized then that the angel wasn't invisible. She was right there, covered in golden fur and bandages, looking at him. With a love that demanded nothing in return. The bills would be high, the recovery long, and Samuel's own home was still a wreck. But none of that mattered in the golden light of the morning. He had witnessed a resurrection. He opened the kennel door, and despite her bandages, Honey hobbled out and immediately went to the incubator. The staff opened it, and she began to lick her babies, checking each one, counting them just as she had in the basement. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated victory. The abstract villain of death had been defeated by the sheer stubbornness of a mother's love and a stranger's kindness. 2 days after the nightmare in the basement, the moment everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. The glow-up. The storm had passed, and the sun was streaming through the clinic windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was time to wash away the trauma. The veterinary technicians prepared a large, warm bath filled with soothing oatmeal. Shampoo. Honey, her bandaged paws now protected by waterproof booties, was lifted gently into the tub. The water turned black almost instantly as the layers of caked mud, oil and debris dissolved, symbolizing the shedding of her painful past. She didn't struggle. Instead, she closed her eyes and leaned into the warm spray, letting out a long sigh of pure relief as the gentle hands massaged her tired muscles. As the suds were rinsed away, a breathtaking transformation occurred. Beneath the gray, matted filth lay a coat of pure, radiant gold. Honey wasn't just a dog, she was a living ray of sunshine. Her fur, once stiff with dirt, dried into soft, feathery waves that caught the light. The dullness in her eyes was replaced by a sparkling amber clarity. When they held up a mirror, mostly for the staff's amusement, Honey actually perked her ears up, seemingly recognizing her own beauty returning. She looked like a queen reclaiming her throne, her tail wagging not out of fear, but out of a newfound joy that infected everyone in the room. The puppies were next, a chaotic assembly line of squeaks and bubbles. They were no longer the shivering, fragile creatures pulled from the floodwaters. Now they were 4 plump, energetic potatoes demanding attention. Hope, the little fighter who had flatlined, was the loudest of them all, protesting the bath with fierce little yaps that made Samuel chuckle for the first time in weeks. Dried and fluffy, they looked like animated teddy bears. They swarmed Samuel as he sat on the floor, climbing over his boots and tugging at his laces. The sight of those clean, happy pups crawling over the man who had saved them was a dopamine hit of pure happiness. Then came the first real meal. No more scavenging or starvation. Samuel placed a large bowl of high-quality kibble mixed with warm broth in front of Honey. She ate with a dignity that was heartbreaking, savoring every bite, but pausing occasionally to nudge a piece toward her puppies. Her maternal instinct still paramount. The puppies meanwhile dove face first into their own mush, tails vibrating like tiny propellers. Their bellies were soon round and full, a stark contrast to the hollow sides Samuel had felt when he pulled them from the cellar. This was the fuel they needed to grow, to heal, and to become the dogs they were meant to be. Fast forward 2 months. The landscape of Joplin was slowly healing. Green grass was pushing through the scarred earth, covering the wounds of the tornado. On Samuel's property, the sounds of construction hammers had replaced the thunder. A new, modest farmhouse stood where the old one had fallen. But the most beautiful sight wasn't the building, it was the golden blur racing across the pasture. Honey's paws were fully healed, the scars hidden beneath her thick fur. She ran with a freedom that took Samuel's breath away, chasing butterflies and rolling in the fresh clover, embracing her second chance at life with every fiber of her being. The puppies had grown into boisterous, clumsy teenagers, a gang of golden trouble that brought life back to the silent farm. They spent their days wrestling in the yard and helping Samuel with his chores by stealing his gloves and burying them in the garden. Hope, the miracle survivor, had become Samuel's shadow. She followed him everywhere, her loyalty absolute. While the other pups were eventually adopted by loving neighbors who had heard the story of the basement miracle, Samuel couldn't part with Hope or Honey. They were a package deal, a family forged in the fire of adversity. Honey's personality blossomed in ways Samuel never expected. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a healer. In the evenings, when the memories of the storm would haunt Samuel, Honey would sense his shift in mood. She would leave her comfortable bed and rest her heavy head on his knee, staring deep into his soul with those wise, ancient eyes. She offered a silent comfort that no human words could convey. She had saved her puppies, yes, but in staying, she had saved Samuel from the crushing loneliness of restarting his life at 65. They had rescued each other. The final scene is one of perfect peace. It's a golden hour sunset, the sky painted in hues of violet and orange. Samuel sits on his newly built porch, rocking slowly in his chair, a Bible open on his lap, but his eyes closed in gratitude. The air smells of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass. At his feet lies Honey, sleeping, soundly twitching as she dreams of chasing rabbits. Hope is curled up in a ball on the rug beside her mother. There is no fear here anymore, no rising water, no darkness. Karma, it seems, has a way of balancing the scales. The storm took Samuel's material possessions, but it gave him a treasure far more valuable: unconditional love. The cruel hand of fate that tried to drown this family was slapped away by the hand of a good man. As the sun dips below the horizon, Honey opens one eye, sees. Samuel thumps her tail once and goes back to sleep. They are home, they are safe, and they are loved beyond measure.